City Manager of Cottonwood.
Thank you, Mary. Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome. Appreciate you coming out. I get to make a couple shameless plugs. The first is the rec center is available for rent. So we are open for business and looking for dollars right here. So in addition, our clubhouse in Old Town is for rent, for weddings or other types of things. So please, when you need something centrally located between all of our wonderful communities, Cottonwood's a great place. But I did want to say welcome and thank you for joining us on this very, very, very important topic. I heard this morning that one of our restaurants is closed. Wild Hog is closed. And it's because of employees. Hog Wild, sorry, thank you, Randy. Because they cannot get enough employees. And as we know, housing is at the one of the root causes of our workers' shortage. So thank you for coming out here. And then she's going to thank all the guests and all the sponsors and those kinds of things. But I want to bring out a couple. I want to thank the county for starting this conversation a year and a half ago. And then I want to thank Sedona for taking the lead with finding Rick and his team to do this. Had it not been for their leadership, we'd be even further behind. So Mayor, thank you for Sedona once again taking the lead. And then Mary's not going to thank herself. She has been the engine behind getting this done. Keeping track of Ron, if you hadn't heard, is a lot of work. And Mary has done a fabulous job of keeping the ball moving forward and bringing this to where we are today, which we are very excited about. So Mary and Vivi Rio, thank you very much. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Mary.
I would like to join with Ron in thanking you for being here, and I guess for thanking you for all of the initiative, the effort you've put into getting us where we are today. It is through the support of all of you in the room who has made this happen. I also would like to thank Ron because he's been amazing to work with in providing leadership and having someone at a city level that I could partner with as we moved through this process and navigated it. It is the result of a whole lot of work that we're actually here for the presentation on Verde Valley Housing, Existing Condition, Needs Assessment, and Tools for Change. Before I turn it over, I'd like to thank some key individuals and entities. The first being the City of Cottonwood, who's taken a lead on this entire process. For Vivi Rio, having a community as a lead partner is very helpful as we navigate through the entire process. Yavapai County was our lead funder, so thank you, James. And Donna's not here, but we appreciate what the county did. The town of Camp Verde, the town of Clarkdale, the town of Jerome. As Ron mentioned, the city of Sedona helped to kick all of this off. And then the Regional Economic Development Center of Yavapai College stepped up and worked with us to do analysis of all the surveys. We got 1,849 surveys in the process we went through, which is pretty amazing when you look at a survey process. And we really did get sampling from across the entire Verde Valley when we were doing our research. And finally, I would just like to acknowledge my colleagues at Vivi Rio, who have been very supportive as well in making this entire process work. I see our chairman of the board is not here, but he had surgery on his foot last Wednesday. And so he thought he would be going every place, and I was pretty sure he wouldn't be showing up at all. And he's not here. Superman can't always, do everything he wants. So thank you very much, everyone, for that. I'd also like to thank Ryan from Yavapai Broadcasting. We appreciate them videotaping this live for the public and for them making it available on YouTube so that we have the presentation this morning available for future use. Next, I would like to introduce our consultants. Rick Emerick from Elliott D. Pollock and Company has been amazing to work with. He has always been on call when we've needed him and asked questions as we've navigated a year of COVID and trying to get this done when it sometimes seemed impossible and when all of our plans got changed almost literally overnight. The other person I'd like to introduce is Sheila Harris from Sheila D. Harris Consulting Services, who is partnering with Rick on the presentation today and sharing her expertise, particularly this afternoon as we begin to move into what are some of the strategies and how do we look at working with all of this data that we have, because we have a whole lot of data. And what are our strategies? What are our priorities? What solutions are we going to use to address the real, true housing need that we have here in the Verde Valley? With that, I'd like to turn it over to Rick Merritt. Your weapon.
Great, thanks.
Here, will it open? Nope.
Okay, I'm good. Well, it's great to finally be here. And Mary and Ron have been a huge help in this. I want to just talk about Sheila a bit. Sheila Harris was at one time, a few years ago, the director of the Arizona Department of Housing. There's a couple of things we'll be talking about today. One is what local communities can do and what you can get from federal and state resources. And Sheila is an expert on the federal and state resources that are available. So there's kind of two things we'll talk about. A large part of what we'll talk about is what you can do at the local level, and that's really important, and that's what we're really focused on today. Just to give you some background on how long this took to get together, on March 16th, 2020, I was supposed to be in Sedona to essentially give a large part of this presentation to Sedona. And I got the call Sunday night, we're cutting this off. We don't know what we're doing. We're not having the meeting. And we finally finished up the Sedona study in December last year. And along the way, we've been working with the Verde Valley people, and they went ahead and they did the survey, and that took a little while to get the survey together and get responses. So here we are today, and we'll go through a large part of what the study is about and where we think the potential is to go. So, and we do want to make this informal. If there are questions along the way about slides, just let me know, and we'll try to answer them as we go through this. So what we'll look at today are existing conditions and the housing gap, what we consider the gap for the Verde Valley. We'll talk about the results of the housing survey, and then we'll talk about the case study and toolkit that we put together. So first, existing conditions. Just some very basic information that you see. Really what is important is the persons per household. You have a very low persons per household. I was surprised to see that when we put the information together, but it really points to the type of population here that is more retirement or has a large retirement community or segment to it. But you can see where we stand today, about almost 30,000 households. These are estimates from the census, and about 65,000 people. The forecast, you can see what's forecasted out into the future. This comes from the Census Bureau, the Arizona Department or Office of Economic Opportunity. And you can see over the next 30 years about an increase of about 13,000 people is what is expected in the future. And a large part of the population growth is expected to go to some to Camp Verde, the most to Cottonwood, and then Sedona beyond that. And the unincorporated county is supposed to really start to grow as well. Household size and median age, once again, relatively low persons per unit. If you look across the state, the average is about 2.8 persons per unit. You're at 2.2 or 2.3, and you have a median age of 52. Median age for Arizona is 36, just to give you a comparison. So a much older population here. Incomes, probably not a whole lot of surprise that you see. The village of Oak Creek, Sedona, are outstanding in their median incomes and average incomes. Once again, something that's not unexpected with what is going on in the economy here today. The one thing we found really interesting was the change in population. And this is something that I think you should be aware of and really take acknowledgement of what is going on. But what the census is showing, looking at 2010, 2019, once again, these are estimates between the 10-year census. So there is a margin of error here. But what you're seeing is the younger population is declining and the older population is increasing. We saw this in Sedona as well. And so really, you know, the population that gives you jobs, that fills jobs, that fills any kind of employment in the area. These are also the people in, you know, from 35 to 55 years of age. They're probably the highest income wage earners. They're leaving the community for whatever reason. At least that's what the census information is showing us. So just something to keep in mind, that you're getting older. You went from 47 years median age to 52 years of median age. You're getting older. What the census says is losing the real heart of your population.
Rick, and those numbers are Yavapai County?
Those are for the Verde Valley. Yeah. So when we talk about affordable housing, we're talking about a couple different segments of it. One is workforce housing, which we are calling, and these are probably mostly HUD definitions. AMI is area median income. So workforce, essential personnel, police, fire, teachers, nurses, people that you really need to keep the economy going, they make between 80 and 120% of the area median income. The low and moderate income are less than 80% of median income. And that's where the federal dollars, the state dollars really get involved, is in the low and moderate income. In a lot of cases, if you undertake local initiatives here on housing, what you're going to target more is the more workforce type housing to keep people here. So it's really a continuum. It's not one or the other that we're looking for. It's both. So here's some numbers just to give you an idea of the income definitions. Moderate income, this is based on almost $65,000 of median income this is for Yavapai County. Somewhere between $52,000 and $77,000 for moderate income. The low income are below 51, and you can see when you get to the very low income, there's households less than roughly $32,000 in income. So that's what we're looking at as we move forward here.
Rick, I'm sorry.
Sure.
So if we go back to the slide, I'm not asking you to, that shows the median income for our communities. Ours was about 40-something in Cottonwood.
Yes.
So it's another 10,000 less than this.
Yes.
So we do the 80 or 120% of that number, which is even significantly lower than this.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. And there, as you can see, there are big variations on the prior charts between the various communities. Yes, and Cottonwood is one of the lowest, yes. Here's just a summary. This is a little bit older data. We can't always get it from HUD, but it just shows you what percentage of the population, and if you look at the number here, 80%, you're talking somewhere around 37% of the population is considered low and moderate income. So it's a significant number that, and it's really not that different than what you find in any community. You're always going to have a lower end of the population making less money, but we're talking somewhere around 37, 38% of the population is low and moderate income households. Workforce is in this category here above, so there's some big numbers to deal with. Employment, you can see employment there's a trend line for both Yavapai and Coconino County. Trend line's up, and it's going to continue up in the future as well. unemployment rate, we just updated this, and you can see that in some communities there's still a little bit of a high level of unemployment. For the most part, you're getting back to normal. Cottonwood, 3% unemployment rate. You're doing pretty well if you can find the people once again to work. But rest of the communities, Camp Verde, Yavapai County, Arizona, we're getting back to where we were almost just roughly a year ago now. Travel time to work, in the 20-minute range, nothing really that unusual about these kind of numbers. The average people have to drive to get to work. This is employment by industry cluster, and it's a very simple calculation. It's called the location quotient. It's on the end of the far table here, far column. And all it does is compare employment in the Verde Valley to employment in Arizona. And if you get above 1 or at 1, that means your economy is basically similar to Arizona. So if you're above 1, you're doing a little bit better in those categories. So construction's about average. Consumer services, which is restaurants, that's a little higher. Government, you're right at the average. Healthcare, you're above average on healthcare. Hospitality and tourism, that's where you really stand out at 3.8. That means you have 3 times, almost 4 times as much of your employment in that category as the state of Arizona as a whole. So not unexpected, and a large part of it is driven by Sedona. But you can see it does stand out. You're a tourism-dependent economy here, as you probably know. And retail's a little on the high side as well. The employment forecast, about 4,200 jobs are expected to be generated over the next 10 years or so. So pretty good employment growth. And where are you going to see that growth? Once again, the forecast is for accommodation and food services. Accommodation is hotels, hospitality. Healthcare, a lot of additional growth in that, construction, retail trade, and other services, just general services in the economy. And you can see that we've showed the remainder of the Verde Valley, and then Cottonwood and Sedona, since they are the ones that are going to be getting the predominance of the population or the employment growth that you're going to see in the future over the next 10 years or so. And I would add that the categories that are shown here are a lot different than what VVREO would like to see happen. They want to see more diversity in the economy. They have quite a bit different targets that they want to target. So these are just forecasts of what they think is what these forecasters think is what's going to happen in the future. But VVREO and the cities and towns here would like to see more diversification, higher wage jobs, things of that nature. So just to give you a demographic and economic summary, forecasted to grow by 13,000 persons over the next 30 years. Employment forecast is for 4,200 jobs over the next 10 years. Sedona and the village of Oak Creek have the highest incomes. Commuting patterns are an indicator of the difficulty in finding affordable housing. And once again, for Sedona, 75% of the employees who work in the city live elsewhere. And for instance, in Cottonwood, 77% of residents leave the city to work every day. So a lot of cross commuting, something you really don't, is really not that unusual from other places we've studied. You're losing your population in your 15 to 59-year-old age group, and your median income or your median age of the population is increasing. The strengths of the Verde Valley are construction and mining, education, health services, leisure and hospitality, and government. Is there you have any other questions about any of the information so far? We're going to launch into talking about housing and what we see is going on in the housing market. If not, So just shows you the types of housing units that are in the Verde Valley. And what I've circled here are what we considered traditional apartment complexes. Now, the way the census categorizes housing units is the number of units in a building. So you have duplexes, you have 3 and 4 plexes, usually just small little buildings. But when you get the above 4 plexes and you get 5 or more units in a building, you get into an apartment complex. So what I'm showing here is that you have about 6% of your housing units in what we consider to be apartments. If you look across the state, it's 16%. So you're really lacking in apartments, which really is the way that you provide, a large part of the way you provide affordable housing. Now, in rural areas of Arizona, a lot of people end up renting mobile homes, living in mobile homes. So you get 18% of your housing units in mobile homes. Not unusual in the non-urban areas of the state, but once again, to make a lot of affordable housing, you're missing out on the apartment type, what I call the conventional apartment type product. And the other thing is, once again, a lot of mobile homes. The thing that we see as a concern is we don't have the data other than built before 1979, but in 1976, HUD passed new construction standards for mobile homes. And they call them, after that, manufactured housing for the most part. So you have some very old mobile homes that are probably health and safety risks for the people who live there. We've seen many, many older mobile home parks. It may just be something that you're going to have to deal with in the future. As these units turn over, they get obsolete, and people in the greater Phoenix area, we're seeing mobile home parks being taken out completely. Maybe you'll see that's going to cause some headaches for people that rent those older units, and they are affordable units, but they're getting old and there are risks associated with them. Seasonal housing units, you're a little bit higher than the statewide average. You're a little over 8% of your housing units are considered seasonal, vacation type homes. You can see Sedona once again is high, Jerome's high, the unincorporated area is high as well. Just something to keep in mind. We looked at housing sales prices from 2002 to 2019 when we basically cut off getting information prior to the pandemic. And this information comes from the Yavapai and Coconino County Assessor. They are very helpful in producing this information for us. And you can see that you're about anywhere from $250,000 to $350,000 in the remainder of what I call the Verde Valley, while Sedona obviously is way up high. And this is all units. This is mobile homes, condos, whatever can be sold, single-family homes. So you can see that the numbers are obviously on the rise. Took a big dip in the Great Recession, after the Great Recession, then started to go up. The unincorporated area has, which includes Oak Creek, village of Oak Creek, so they're seeing increases in housing prices as well. They drive a lot of what the increase is occurring in the unincorporated area. And then once again, just getting back to the 2019 pricing that we saw, and we recognize that the housing market today is probably out of control. We're having a tremendous influx of people from all over the country coming here. In Greater Phoenix, the prices are up something like 20% in just the past year. It's probably the same thing that's happening here. We did from Ron and Mary get some information on the housing market here from one of your real estate companies, and the same thing's happening here. There's a shortage of housing. You can't build the housing fast enough. If you try to sell your house today, you'll get a big number for it, but where are you going to go? Because there's no inventory around. So it's a really difficult market. It's something We have never seen, it's not the same as in the Great Recession when everybody and their sister could get a mortgage and buy a house, and then we had the fallout in the Great Recession. That's a different situation here now, and we're seeing a lot of people come in from California, from the East Coast with cash. They're buying with cash, waiving all kinds of requirements that you normally see, and unfortunately, if you're in the market for the first time for a starter home, you aren't going to get it because the people with cash are going to come in, if you have to get a mortgage, it's much more difficult to buy a house. So that's happening all over the state right now. So once again, these numbers are lower than what you're seeing in the market today, but that's what we had prior to the pandemic. We're also seeing rents go up. These were the rents in 2019. And you can see once again, at the time you could probably get a rental for about $1,000 a month in Sedona, a little bit more than that. But that was pretty typical of what you could find. And once again, what we call the traditional apartment inventory is only 1,400 units out of the 29,000 units that you have in the county or in the Verde Valley. So a very low number of what we consider conventional apartment units. And we tried to get some information on how rents were increasing. This is for Yavapai County as a whole, but you can see, according to Zillow, from 2017 to 2019, rents went up 10% each, at least 10% each year. So rents are going, housing values are going. HUD tracks fair market, what they call fair market rents, and they're even showing between 2015 and 2020 that rents are up over 30% in a lot of areas, 50% in Cornville. So we're really seeing some jumps in rent that once again just makes the affordability issue more difficult. And the problem is more difficult today probably than it is shown by these numbers. We looked at housing cost burden. HUD defines cost burden as somebody paying more than 30% of their income on rent or a mortgage. For rent, it includes utilities and the rent that they pay. So this is just cost burden units overall, and about what HUD says, or the census says, about 36% of all the households in the Verde Valley pay more than 30% of their income towards housing. And many pay more than 50%. I don't know if I have that number, but there's many households that pay more than 50% of their income towards housing. This is what wages for what we would call essential workers, once again, the workforce housing personnel, teachers, police, firefighters, and then you get into nursing assistants, somebody who's waiting in a restaurant, housekeeping. This is the affordable payment, which includes rent and utilities, and then this is the rent number, the affordable rent itself. So once again, very difficult numbers if you're trying to rent a unit here in the Verde Valley. You're right at the maximum of what a lot of the essential personnel can afford. So it's, once again, a very difficult situation. We did find out in talking with Sedona, they have a couple of police officers that live in Gilbert and commute up, rent a place here during the week, put in their time, and then go back to Gilbert. So it just gives you an idea how difficult it is to find housing. If you want to buy a house, a $250,000 or $300,000 house, we looked at an interest rate of about 3.5%. It's probably a little high for today, but you'd need almost $60,000 to buy a $250,000 house, or over $71,000 to buy a $300,000 house with a small down payment. Once again, if you can find those houses today, good luck. You're going to be fighting against people with cash down, potentially, total cash down on a house. So once again, just to summarize, affordable housing, we're referring to low income, moderate income, and workforce households. 36% of the households in the Verde Valley are cost burden, and in some cities, they're more than 40% are cost burden. Single family and detached units account for 83% of all housing units in the Verde Valley. Once again, that's rather high compared with the state overall. And out of 33,000 housing units, total housing units, only about 1,400 we consider traditional apartment complexes. Most of them end up to be in Cottonwood for the most part. Once again, 6.2% of all housing units are considered apartments. 16% statewide is what you would expect to find. And once again, our numbers are a little dated at this point. I don't think anybody really saw the impact that we saw happening during the pandemic and really as things started to get a little bit better, and how people from other states are coming here for employment purposes because they feel a little safer here than being in a large urban area, being driven out by tax burdens of other states. So it really has driven the problem even worse. And of course, short-term rentals, we'll talk a little bit more, but in the survey that you did for the Verde Valley, short-term rentals were at one of the top of the list of concerns. And certainly in Sedona, it's become a huge problem. And we didn't get any relief from the state legislature on that issue this year. Hopefully there's other efforts to do that in the future. And once again, mobile homes built before 1976 may have health and safety risks that you want to consider. It's going to only get worse as time goes on for those units. Any questions? Okay, we'll keep going. So I want to talk about the housing gap analysis that we put together. Once again, the cost burden, about 36% cost burden overall in the Verde Valley. And if you look at how many people are paying more than 50% of their income towards housing, it's about 16%, 4,600 households. So a lot of people are really burdened by housing. The cost burden for the U.S. is about 30%. Arizona is right at that. So once again, you're a little bit above that for the Verde Valley itself. So there's two components of affordable demand. One is the existing affordable demand, and we'll talk about that. And the demand for employment growth as the region increases in jobs. As people come into the economy, start working in the economy, they're going to need housing. And so we took that into account in the numbers that we put together for you today. And we'll get into that as we talk about the case studies as well. So this is a theory of how we look at the gap. Now the gap, there's two ways to look at it. One is the housing burden, and the other, we tried to match up what people make and how many units are in the economy that they can afford. This actually we did with Sheila back a number of years ago now. We did a housing gap analysis for the whole state of Arizona. And this is the theory behind it. And the affordability gap, from what we found, occurs at the lower income. This is income on the bottom line. Occurs at the lower income levels and actually at the higher income levels. And what you have is people that can't, at the lower income levels, that can't find housing, they're forced up into finding housing above what they can afford technically. But there's also people at the higher income levels that don't pay 30%. They have the ability to pay less than that. So they go into the area where they can find housing that costs them less than 30%. So that's the theory behind it. We did this, it's in the report for every community in the Verde Valley and the county we did it for. And it's a little different in smaller communities. I think this is what we found in the city of Chandler, which is a community now of 200,000 or more people. So you get more of a traditional trend in housing affordability. But let me show you what comes out here for the Verde Valley, and this is for Cottonwood. We use Cottonwood as an example once again. And what we did is we showed the affordability range, how many households were in each income range, the affordability range of the people in each of those ranges. Then we looked at housing value, monthly rent, and what you come up with is the shortage of housing. And it goes up and then it comes down. So what we do is really target the height of that affordability gap, which in Cottonwood is about 370 households, something like that. And we did this for every community in the Verde Valley. And what you end up in Cottonwood, though, is a gap, once again, at the low end of the income range. You have this big surplus in the middle, and you have a gap at the end. At the higher income, once again, people paying less than what they could afford at 30%, and they're in the surplus area as well, so the same type of thing. But the main thing that you want to focus on is, where is the gap occurring? The gap is occurring at household incomes of less than $25,000. So the very, very low income households. These are households that work in restaurants, they work in grocery stores, they are essential personnel. And I've said in several meetings, I think what the pandemic really showed us is how important these lower wage jobs are to the economy. There are people in grocery stores that make $15 an hour. They worked there during the pandemic. If they weren't there, if the truck drivers weren't there delivering the goods, if the workers weren't there putting the produce and the goods out to serve the population, we would have come to a total stop. But they worked. They're essential personnel, even though they make $15, $20 an hour, something like that. So it's important, as you get more people coming into the community, being employed in the community, you're going to need those essential workers that go all the way down from nurses and teachers all the way down into clerks and people working in grocery stores. So it's really important you look at overall how the economy operates and how you need to have housing across the board for these people. So that's the gap. And once again, what we're looking at is, if you look at the gap for Sedona, it's very high. The gap is for people making $100,000 can't find housing in Sedona. So they're a little bit different than the rest of the Verde Valley, where the gap is really at $25,000 and less. So we'll keep this in mind. We think we have to separate that out because they're different situations. And we'll talk about this.
Rick,
Yeah.
can you back up? I mean,
Yeah.
you look at the 444 surplus in that one category for Cottonwood, but we still have a 700 gap in the Verde Valley.
Right.
So those people from Sedona are living in Cottonwood, which creates less housing for Cottonwood. So
Exactly.
even though it looks like there's a surplus, there is no surplus.
There is no surplus. That's a good observation. Yeah. Now, I will tell you there are some benefits for people who can't find housing in Sedona coming to live in Cottonwood and Camp Verde, because they come here, they spend their money, they go to Walmart, they buy groceries, whatever. You get state shared revenue because you have more population here. So there are some benefits to it, but it is creating a housing situation for the other parts of the Verde Valley. So once again, I showed this before, where the employment is going to occur, largely going to occur in Cottonwood and Sedona, in those various categories. So what we did was we looked at how much demand was going to be generated by employment, by people coming here and needing housing. And you can see what we came up with as a 5-year demand. Another on top of what is existing here as needing affordable housing. This is in addition to that. 5 years out, you're going to need housing for 943 more households across the Verde Valley. And that's just based on the employment growth of 4,200 people, new jobs that'll be coming here in the future. So the annual demand is 190. So once again, you have to take care of your existing population. You also need to plan for, who's going to be here in the future, what jobs are going to be needed in the future to keep the economy moving in the right direction. So what we came up with was the overall 5-year demand for affordable housing, about 2,800 units. That's the existing demand. The 5-year demand, 943, about 3,700 new units required to keep up with demand and to deal with your current situation in the Verde Valley. So it's a staggering number. It's a number that is going to be difficult to attack, and it's going to take a lot of effort to do that, to make a difference. So once again, any other questions I might have on any of this? Yes, sir.
Yeah, the monthly expenses, is just rent or just mortgage, all that, it doesn't count utilities and things like that?
For renters, it's utilities and rent. And for if you own a home, it's primarily the mortgage, which includes a property tax, if you have private mortgage insurance, that type of thing. So with the help of Yavapai College, Mary and Ron helped put together a survey. The survey was somewhat similar to what we did in Sedona. We went out and surveyed, or the college surveyed people across the valley. 1,800 people responded. It was primarily directed at people working in the Verde Valley, although we got a lot of people that appeared to be retired as well. But great response, and I just wanted to go through a couple of the conclusions of what they found in the survey. Once again, it's 2/3 of responses were reported from 2 or few people in the household. Once again, a very low household number. 40% of them were single income households. If you have a dual income household, you're going to be doing a lot better. Even if 2 people working at Walmart, you can probably afford some of the rents that we talked about. But if you're single income household, that's a little different. If you have kids and 1 person working, that's a different situation. Median income was relatively good at $65,000 and above the Arizona median income. And retirees made up 26% of the responses. And the healthcare and medical sector represented 23% of the responses. What we found in the Sedona study and in this survey was the majority of people worked here more than 5 years, and they travel less than 20 miles to work. So people like living and working here. They like the environment they live in. In Sedona, we found a lot of people were here more than 10 years working. So there's a lot of reasons why people want to be here. Once they get here, they like what they see. They like how they live. The problem is trying to find affordable housing. And what came out is the housing-related challenges are the lack of affordable housing, the lack of housing in general. There aren't houses on the market today, enough houses on the market. They say there's low wages, and once again, concerns with vacation rentals came out in a big way as well from this survey. And the college also asked the question about housing burden, and the numbers came out very similar to what we found, a little bit higher than what we were saying. There's about 40% of people making are paying 30% of their income on housing. We're at 36%. So very similar. And 72% of the responses say they're satisfied or very satisfied with their housing here. So if you can find a housing and you like living here, that's great. If you're coming into the community, it may be a totally different situation, particularly today. It may be much worse than what we're even showing in these slides. The reason why people move from the Verde Valley: lack of affordable housing, lack of medical resources, and low wages. And the lack of quality medical resources may be related to the large retirement population that's here. Home ownership to renter ratio is about 70% to 27%. That's pretty consistent with what we find in the census. I believe the home ownership rate for Arizona is about 68%. You're right at that. So I want to talk a little bit about the case studies and the toolkit that we came up with. What we did really as part of the Sedona study was we went out and we looked at how other tourism-dominated, housing-constrained communities were dealing with their housing problems. So we looked at Martha's Vineyard, which is an island off Massachusetts, very seasonal population that lives there. They really operate 3-4 months of the year is their season, and the rest, nobody comes, or very few people come. But they have a huge problem for 3-4 months. And if you go there, a lot of the people in the hotels speak with an accent. So they're brought in literally from other countries to work there. And they're given housing as much as they can. It's very difficult. Flagstaff has great housing programs for affordable housing. Now, I will tell you, and it's something I think is a model that you can work from here. But I will tell you that if you talk to developers who develop in Flagstaff, it is a total pain dealing with the city. And that's something you need to consider as you work through these affordable housing issues. And I'll be talking about the types of new regulation that you should consider. But it will change the character of what goes on here. It'll change the character of how development occurs here. So there's a real balance that you have to deal with. And Flagstaff is a difficult place for developers to work in because of their affordable housing issues and the policies that they have. Telluride and Breckenridge, very tourist-dominated economies that we looked at, and once again, they have very strict requirements on how you produce affordable housing. So it's going to be a balance you have to look at. So in the toolkit, what we did is we looked at the cost of development and what type of tools you would use for each of these different cost items. You have land, which is 15 to 20% of affordable housing or any kind of housing. Soft costs, another 15 to 20%. That's design, entitlements, permits, and then hard costs, actually putting up the units. So the tools we looked at: community land trusts, land banks. You have city-owned land. If you have city-owned land that you can put out to an RFP for developers, that's a great way to do things. It's a lot of cases it's spent money, it's sunk cost. It's not going to cost your budget if you have land that's been sitting around doing nothing for years. Zoning and general plan policies, density bonuses, city contribution to lower the cost of private land, gap financing, we call that, the gap between making a project work and not working. And some cities provide that kind of financing. In terms of soft costs, a lot of communities waive permit fees. They reimburse for development fees. You can't waive development fees under state law, but you can defer them, or the city can pay the development fees on behalf of the developer. We found in Sedona, I haven't looked a whole lot on your impact fees here, but in Sedona, we found that the impact fees are a significant barrier to development. I believe the fee for one unit, for an apartment unit, is $8,000 to tie into the city's sewer system. That's 3 to 4 times higher than what we see in greater Phoenix area. I'm not saying it's not justified, but it is a number that has really been a barrier for development of affordable housing in Sedona. So additional soft costs, expedited review of plans. You can have flexible design standards that you'll maybe waive for an affordable unit. Streamlining the development processes, and what's called apartment development by right, where if a piece of land is zoned for apartments, somebody can go in and just develop it without a whole lot of issues behind it. And then hard costs, perhaps you can waive the construction sales tax. That's done a lot in the greater Phoenix area. Consistency with building codes, take a look at that. Reduce parking requirements if you're near mass transit. City assistance with infrastructure improvements. If you have to put in water, sewer lines, put in a road, maybe the city can help with that. Direct capital funding of development, once again, gap financing, and partnerships with private developers and nonprofits. So that's how a lot of these tools can affect the price of affordable housing. We'll talk a lot more about this. So zoning and planning, we went through the zoning and planning general plan documents that are available in each of the communities. Most of the community general plans talk about housing. Because you're under, I think it's 50,000 population, you don't have to have under state law a housing element. But everybody, I believe, except the county, has a housing element. A lot of them talk about affordable housing as being an issue. So that's good that it's recognized in most of the general plans. A lot of the general plans are getting old now and need to be updated, and now is when you can, once again, delve into affordable housing a little bit more than what's done in the past. In Camp Verde, I couldn't tell what the density is. This being maybe from Camp Verde can tell me what that is, but I couldn't tell what the density. That's the maximum density that's permitted under their current R2 district. In Clarkdale's about 14.5 units an acre. In Cottonwood, you're up to 29 units an acre, which is really the density you need to get an affordable complex going. In Jerome, obviously they have topographic restrictions. As far as I can see, they only permit single and 2-family dwellings. Sedona has a good mix of different types of apartment densities, from 8 to 12 to 20 units an acre. And they also have the design incentives and guidelines for affordable housing, which is a really good document. They've been able to implement a lot of those policies, and they've received in lieu payments from developers. I understand there's a couple affordable projects that are potentially going on right now that have been negotiated with the city. So we'll talk a lot more about these guidelines, because that's what you find in Sedona and that's what you find in Flagstaff. And those are the types of guidelines you maybe need to consider in the Verde Valley overall. And then Yavapai County is at about 14 units an acre. What we're suggesting is you need to adopt consistent policies that require the provision of affordable housing units at the time of rezoning and annexation. And as I mentioned, Sedona and Flagstaff have those policies and the types of documents maybe you want to consider. Under state law, you can't require affordable housing anytime there's a development going in. It's not allowed by state law. But if you rezone a house or rezone a property, you annex property, you can negotiate how that development, if that development provides affordable housing. And that's what Sedona and Flagstaff do right now. They go through, if there's a rezoning process, you go through their process for creating affordable units in that project. So it's something, once again, that we think you should consider. But once again, it'll change the character of how development occurs in the Verde Valley, and you need to balance that. So what we think are the best tools for you to take a look at are the community land trust. Flagstaff uses this as their primary method for developing affordable housing units. And what it does is the property is transferred, dedicated in some way to the community land trust. The trust owns it. The trust charges maybe $1 a year to rent the land. That takes 25 or 15 to 20% off the cost of housing. And then the home or unit is built and is kept at affordable rates. And once again, because the land is basically just leased, it's leased by the land trust, it reduces the cost of housing. We think it's something that the Verde Valley could really focus on as a way of attacking the affordability issue. It could be a substitute for a housing authority, which is a much different entity to deal with. This is more of a, I don't want to call it voluntary, but it's a much more useful tool to use. It does require staffing to administer the community land trust. It requires monitoring of the sale of homes as they occur. And we would like to see, probably you should profit with or partnership with a nonprofit agency to keep this thing moving. And Housing Solutions of Northern Arizona has a great track record in doing that. That's somebody you probably should be talking to. And Flagstaff has their community land trust program, something, once again, that they use for all types of affordable housing now. If you have city-owned land, if you have land at the end of a park that's not being used, that you could develop into, or it could be developed into some type of affordable housing project, or if you just have land that is not being used today. It's a sunk cost to the city, doesn't affect your budget. It's a really effective way of, once again, you could transfer this land to the community land trust and go through the process of developing affordable housing. A lot of what we found in looking at the ski communities like Vail, like Breckenridge, Telluride.
Got a Big Sky resident, former, sitting here.
Okay.
Can't leave us out of that.
Sorry, we had a limit on how far we go with it.
Got to represent Montana.
Yeah. Deed restrictions are a covenant placed on a piece of property that keep it affordable over the long term. Like I said, the ski communities and Flagstaff have used that process. The problem is that, at least in Flagstaff in particular, they've encountered difficulties in securing mortgages for properties. When a property is sold, a new person comes in and buys the unit, appraisers don't know how to factor in the deed restriction into the value of the property. And therefore, Flagstaff is abandoning their deed restriction program and converting all the deed restricted properties to, or transferring them to their community land trust. So it's a very popular thing in housing constrained communities, but it is becoming more and more difficult. Flagstaff finds that it's not going to really work for them. And once again, I talked about linkage programs. Say a commercial project comes to town, and if you're in a ski community, this commercial project produces 100 jobs. The ski community says, well, you'd have to provide 20 affordable housing units to develop this project. In Arizona, you can't do that unless there's a rezoning you're going through or annexation or something like that. So that's what a linkage program is, linking development of a property to affordable housing. Illegal in Arizona, but you can get around it by rezoning or annexation. So It does require staffing to monitor deed restriction rents, but once again, I think a lot of the cities, Flagstaff in particular, is getting away from it just because the administrative headaches they're having, not being able for people to get mortgages to buy the deed restricted units. Development incentives, I talked about this quite a bit, and the things you can do: density incentives, flexible design standards, waiver of fees, reimbursement of development impact fees, reduced parking requirements, maybe waiving sales tax on the construction of a project, which are pretty significant. Maybe some legal issues to deal with on that, but those are some of the incentives that I think are important that you can build today into your zoning ordinance, once again, just to incentivize a little bit affordable units. Alternative housing types, we looked at tiny homes, we looked at all types of new things coming on. I'm not a big proponent of tiny homes. Accessory dwelling units are becoming very, very popular. There are cities across the country that have now allowed accessory dwelling units, so, a granny flat, a house in the backyard, a unit above a garage, whatever it may be. They've allowed those by right in many single-family districts now. It expands the housing inventory. The person that owns the home can make a little bit of extra money. The problem you run into is that they, particularly in this kind of environment, they turn into a short-term rental. So somehow, it may be a way that you can deed restrict those units, that they can only be used for a long-term rental, that they can't sell the unit to a separate individual, things of that nature. But it is an option. It just needs a little work at this point because of the short-term rental issue. Staffing, we recommended to Sedona that they hire a staff that's solely devoted to housing. We think you probably need that here in the Verde Valley overall. Once again, you can work with the partnership with Housing Solutions of Northern Arizona. We also looked at dedicated funding sources. It's going to take money to staff up these housing efforts and initiatives. Some of the things you may want to consider, once again, you got to balance tax increases with the benefits you're going to get from those tax increases. So you could increase the sales tax rate, dedicate it solely to housing or staffing, dedicated property tax, increase the bed tax, which doesn't typically fall upon the people living here. Mitigation or linkage programs that require in-lieu payments. Once again, Sedona's been somewhat successful in negotiating those, and they have a fund now for housing that is generated from their negotiations with commercial and residential developers. You can allocate funding directly from the general fund, which Sedona is also doing now. You can sell or lease proceeds from city-owned land to fund these affordable housing issues, and you can do bond financing. Flagstaff tried to do that a few years ago on a ballot initiative, and it was voted down, I think 52, 53%, something like that. That's a little maybe beyond where you want to go, is actually doing bond financing for affordable housing, but Flagstaff tried it and it didn't get through the bond or the initiative.
Being unfamiliar with Arizona tax laws, but in coming from Montana, we were looking at, with the Big Sky Community Housing Trust, at real estate transfer taxes, but unfortunately the Constitution in Montana prohibits that, but that's what funds Aspen, for example's housing trust wholeheartedly, and is a silver bullet solution. Is it legal or illegal in Arizona for a real estate transfer tax?
The question is about a real estate transfer tax funding affordable housing. I don't know if it's legal or not. I suspect it may be illegal to do that. We've never seen it. In Arizona, it's once again a pretty good burden on when you sell your house to pay 0.5%, 1%, or something of value. But I haven't seen it in Arizona. I don't think it's legal in Arizona from what I know. So a lot of what I talked about so far is what you can do at the local level. And once again, it is very difficult at the local level, to reach down to the people making the lowest income and using your resources to reach those. So the other options are the federal resources, the state and federal resources. The low-income housing tax credit program is a hugely successful program. It's been used across the country. Cottonwood has, I don't know, 4 or 5 projects that have been funded that way. There's one, a very old one in the village of Oak Creek. So they have been used here. The problem is they're small, usually small complexes, but the tax credits available to Arizona are very limited, and it's highly competitive. And most of the funding for this program goes to the big cities, Phoenix, Tucson, Mesa, where there is significant need. Not that there isn't need here, but it is highly competitive, and a lot of the projects require some kind of soft debt or subsidies from local government, which isn't unusual, and the bigger cities can often provide that gap financing. But it is a tremendous program, and something when you get into, if you have a staff, if you have housing programs underway in the Verde Valley, it's something you really should consider. And Sheila is an expert in this.
Just because I ran the program for 6 years, I have some
Do you
knowledge
wanna-
of it.
Do you want to talk maybe?
Now,
Well,
I will later.
do you want?
If you're going to speak, I need you to go to the microphone, please, so that it gets picked up.
Darn TV.
We'll give Rick a quick break here. Hi, everyone. I'm Sheila Harris. I'm the founding director of the Arizona Department of Housing. The low-income housing tax credit program that Rick just referred to is one that has produced about 40-some thousand units in the state of Arizona. So it is significant in what it's done, but that's been since 1989. So it's not something that you produce 5,000 units per year. However, later on, we're going to get into some discussion about the stimulus money, and that may be able to expand it and have further additional units created. It is a challenging program. You need somebody that is highly sophisticated to help you do that, whether it's a nonprofit or for-profit developer. That's not to say that you can't create a partnership between your city and or nonprofit to further those goals. There's some other financing mechanisms that we'll get into, but this is the stable. This is what has produced most of the affordable housing in the United States since 1989. One other note, with regards to the real estate property transfer tax, Arizona is one of 13 states that does not participate in that. So again, if you want to increase your lobbying activities at the legislature, here's another opportunity.
So that's, once again, one of the most successful programs. Another one that Sheila is an expert in is called private activity bonds. And it's very similar to the low-income housing tax credit program, but it's based on what's called 4% tax credits instead of 9%, which is permitted under the low-income tax credit program. It's very successful in providing affordable housing to households earning less than 60% of the area median income. And the complexes are mixed income, which is often more acceptable to local communities. So you may have 40% low income and 60% market rate units, something on that order. It's also less competitive than the low income tax credit program. And in most years, the funding that's available is not used up. So, but once again, like Sheila said, it's a very complex program. You have to work with developers who are in this business. Partnerships with other low-income nonprofits is also very helpful. The projects require more soft debt or more subsidies from the local communities to make this work. But once again, it is another program that's not as competitive. The funding is usually available. And we, Sheila in particular, has been working with has worked over the years with low-income housing tax credit developers, knows them well. We've talked to 2 or 3 of them, and they are very interested in coming to the Verde Valley. So once again, if you get a staff person, there's just a lot of marketing that needs to be done to show what is needed here and how these developers can come and make things work. But once again, these programs may require different subsidies. There's subsidy programs that can come from the state programs or local as well. So the next steps that we see are to identify, and what we really want to talk about later, I think, in the next session, is to identify the structure of a Verde Valley regional cooperative affordable housing approach. How are you going to put this program together? What type of policies do each of the communities need to adopt to make this program work? How's it all going to be funded? So there's a lot of issues we have to talk about in terms of implementation of the program. We've identified tools that the communities can use to promote affordable housing, and we need to further specify those. What are the most beneficial to the community, the local communities here, and how do they go about doing that? And lastly, we're going to provide a 5-year strategy on how you go about putting this whole program together. But it really comes down to how the communities want to work together in promoting affordable housing on a regional effort and what that takes. I know there's talk about staffing already between a couple of the communities, and hopefully that is the start of it, and the other communities can help out on that effort as well from a funding perspective. And I think that's it. If you, just a plug for our company, if you want to see economic data released each week, you can subscribe to our website. It's called the Monday Morning Quarterback. Every morning, Monday during the day, we put out some analysis of what's going on in the Arizona and local economy. So, but with that, I'll turn it back to Mary.
I'd like to thank you, Rick and Sheila, for all the information that you have shared, and to let the community know that we will continue community engagement with this process. This afternoon, those of us that are representing the different communities will be addressing some of the tools that we'll be using and looking at into the new future. And we will be coming back again to the full community of the Verde Valley to share that information, to get input, to get others engaged in this process, because this affordable housing impacts every single one of us who are living here, who want to shop here, who want to have a viable community, a diverse community. So we look forward to working with the community further as all of this housing information unfolds. Thank you.